Hello and welcome to Cricket8 podcast. I'm Megha and joining me here is Jarrod Kimber, and today we're going to be talking about where and how India lost the fourth test and also where and how Australia won it. The two could be the same or the two could be different. But first and foremost, how do things look as far as WTC is concerned? South Africa has already sealed its spot. We also talk about that game against Pakistan. But how does it look for India and Australia?
I think Australia's in the box seat now, aren't they? India could still sneak in, but India needs a lot of things to go right for it at the moment. Whereas in Australia's case, I think they're in a much better position to be able to go through. So most likely it's going to be Australia and South Africa in the final.
There's a comment that's related to the point that we are making over here. Vasan says, with rain predicted for the 2 days in Sydney, the final 2 days, what can India do to enforce the result? As an analyst, how different would you prepare? Because this is a must-win match for India. Must-win match to retain the BGT. They've not lost it in the last 10 years. And also because WTC points on offer. Because India still has a chance if it wins this game. Because if they don't win it, then probably mathematically as well, they're out.
Yeah. Look, I mean, all you can really do is try and take more wickets. And as an analyst, that's not a good conversation. Saying to your bowlers, if you guys can take more wickets quicker, that would be better for us, right? I think I played in a game with Scotland where we needed to beat Netherlands by like a massive amount to qualify for a World Cup. And so we took a bunch of risks and we ended up losing the game, right? And I think the team thought of that as a bad tactic, because I didn't, because I was like, well, we still had backup games that we could qualify for the World Cup. So it was a slightly different situation than what you have here. But if you know that is what you have to do, then it's as simple for me as
Yeah, I thought I was the only one, but apparently we're not able to hear Jared. But to the point that you were making about how important it is for India to win this one and how they should go all out looking for a win in this particular clash. Now, what's also interesting now is
Remember to support
that
us
South
by
Africa.
subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.
am I here? Can you hear me?
Now we can absolutely hear you.
That's so weird.
complete your
Basically,
point.
all I said to that other question was, you just have to get it in the players' minds that a draw doesn't matter, and that they have to take risks. And if the risks go against them, you say it doesn't matter if we lose here, because we were already, we were already on that trajectory. But if we take the risk and it works, we can, retain our trophy, and also we're still in World Test Championship mode. That's all you can say to them is, we need to push the game and take risks that you might normally see as too risky.
For example, Rohit Sharma, we've seen that his batting approach has undergone a slight change from what we saw, say, a few months back. He's averaging around 6 this series. Before the series as well, in that stretch of 5 home games, he only averaged around 13. Do you think he'd be better off taking the risk that he used to take, say, in the England series at the start of the year?
I thought he took a risk in this last innings and got a great ball and nicked it to slip. So, sometimes it doesn't work. I thought he looked good in that last innings. I think, though, if you're talking about taking risks, the best risk would be to not play Virat and Rohit, right? Play everyone who's in form. That's a huge risk. You might alienate the two older players. But if we're talking about risks, and desperation, at the moment, they look like making more runs with those two out of the side than they do in the side. So if you want to force a result, that's probably how I would look at it.
But then who walk in for those two at the moment with the squad at India's disposal?
Well, you'd just bring Shubman Gill in, wouldn't you? And Washington Sundar and Nitish would bat slightly higher in the order. And then you can bring in another bowler. It's not hard.
So we've got our shots material from here already. There's some comments here, and Keshav, his question is, if even if India wins in Sydney, would you back Sri Lanka to win the series against Australia? Now, in home conditions, and they've been pretty strong in the last few months at home across formats. And how do you see then Australia faring, considering the spinners, apart from Lyon, that they have?
Look, I think we've seen Australia played okay in India at times as well. They won a series in Pakistan. So, they've had some success in Asia over the last couple of years. I still think Australia are favourites in that series, but there's not much between it. I think it's mostly, I think it's probably more likely it's 1-1, if we're being honest.
1-1 is what you've predicted. What is it with you, Jarrod, today? I think because you're not available for a long time today, I think you're just giving us reels and shots one after the other. Bharat, the point that he's making here is that Akashdeep and Bumrah versus Lyon versus Boland, which was your favorite last wicket partnership in the series, particularly that last innings and the last test?
I think probably the Akash and Bumrah one, my memory of it was a bit more exciting and fun. So I think I'd go with that. I think Boland is a worse bat than any of those other guys. So there's always something great about that. That last over where they made all the runs off Bumrah and there was a catch at slips that was caught in the legs that was a no ball was an all-timer though, to be fair. That was a great moment of cricket. It was an incredible test match for number 11s. Number 11s in that match batted for 149 minutes. And then Mohammad Siraj came out and had to block out for like an hour. And I was like, well, looking at this match, he should be up, and he lasted 4 minutes. So it was a great, last couple of test matches have been great for number 11s. And who doesn't want something that's great for number 11s?
And then we also saw not necessarily number 11, but in South Africa as well, this partnership between Jansen and Rabada that saw South Africa through. Yeah. Your thoughts on that partnership?
I missed it. I was asleep. Did you see it?
I didn't catch the entire part of it, but I was following the scores.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, the history of those sorts of partnerships to win games. It's awesome. So I don't know if you know this, South Africa won their first ever test match when I think they needed, I could be wrong with the numbers, but I think they needed something like 47 runs with the last wicket. And they had a partnership that won the game from there. And they'd never won a test before. Imagine winning your first ever test after what would they have been? 16 years in test cricket by that point. And you win your first ever test with a last wicket partnership. That I think had held the record then for about the next 80 or 90 years. Like, it took forever for that record to be broken. Look, it's one of the great things in our game. Eventually I think substitutions will come into cricket. And the cricket will change. And the one thing that we all miss is the fact that number 11s are absolutely rubbish. And sometimes they have to bat.
And they batted well, the low order in case of South Africa. And of course, the last test, we've constantly been harping on how the low order fared. And that's important because India, since 2015, haven't been conceding that much the tail. They've been pretty clinical with the tail because that's what the numbers suggest. Although there have been conversations in between how India have struggled to polish off the tail, but 100-run partnership against them is a rarity.
Yeah, the whole thing about India struggling with the tail, I don't think it holds up when you look at them overall. I think it's one of those things that you remember. I'm constantly being told by every cricket's fan base in the world we're terrible at bowling against the tail. And it's just like, we can't all be terrible bowling against the tail. It's just that when the tail put on a big partnership, you remember it more, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I think the difference here is that pitch had really evened out by that stage. And if you look at the fact that Siraj also batted for half an hour, Boland batted for lots of time all the way through, I think that tells you more about the ball and the pitch than it does India's bowling against the tail.
And India's batting, India's tail-enders have, at least in India, fared really well. And the previous Border Gavaskar Trophy as well, India has its tail to thank for the victory there. Meanwhile, Rakshat has made sure that he's pointed out that Nitish Kumar is here in the comments section. He says, hi, happy. He's happy as well. He's got the reason
he
to
made
be
100.
happy.
Yeah, I'm sure he would be.
Though doesn't bear a resemblance to the Nitish Kumar Reddy that we saw on our TVs. Good to great says his 11 would be Yashasvi, Rahul, Sundar, Virat, Pant, Jurel, Nitish, Jaddu, Akashdeep, Siraj and Bumrah being the skipper. So clearly there's one person that he has already dropped. Jarrod suggested both the legends being dropped. Yes, Jarrod?
Well, I'm a bit confused by this side. He's brought Jarrell in,
Gill.
but not Gill in. He's not suggesting that Washington Sundar's going to bat at 3, is he? I mean, and that seems a little bit optimistic.
He did, right, in the domestic Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. I mean, and Stuart Broad was given a contract for Leicestershire when he was a kid as a batter, and Azhar Ali was a bowler when he was young.
And you made a video on Ashwin, who started.
Well,
as an
Ashwin was an opener, wasn't it? Yeah. Washington Sundar is not going to be a Test number 3, right? And if he is, he's not going to be able to start at number 3. It is almost impossible at the moment to make any runs in Test cricket batting at number 3. That's one of the reasons. Gill is almost a Rohit. Well, he's not, is he? He's had a really good year in Test cricket, and so no, that's not the case.
Genie says that India's low order is the only good thing to come out of the series. The series is not over yet, but also the Pacers, Jasprit Bumrah, Akashdeep, he has been extremely unlucky. He has created those chances, but hasn't managed to convert them into wickets, as many wickets as he probably deserved. Your analysis of Akashdeep, he did really well in India, and now in Australian conditions as well, he fared really well.
Yeah, I think what we need to work out with Akashdeep at the moment is, are we seeing a bowler who is unlucky and has created the chances, or are we seeing a bowler who is creating the sorts of chances that don't bring about wickets, right? And that's not a particularly easy thing to see. I think with Ishant Sharma, I would put him as someone who I just always thought bowled too short. And I would probably put Freddie Flintoff and Chris Martin in the previous generation as those sorts of bowlers. And so they get a lot of plays and misses, but they don't get a lot of wickets. I'm not sure I feel that about Akashdeep. I think he's bowled a perfectly fine length. So maybe it's just one of those things where the wickets haven't come. And realistically, if he'd had a similar series to Siraj, India might be 2-1 up now, right? I think that they don't need a lot from Akashdeep because Bumrah's doing the job of 2 bowlers, right? But they need one more bowler to stand up and have a reasonable series.
Interesting. Now, before we conclude this topic of India versus Australia for Test, the management has faced a lot of flack, and for multiple reasons. But the fact that they backed Nitish Kumar Reddy and he created number of records, including being the highest scorer in 4 innings, and those were the initial matches of his career, initial innings of his career. So that is some sort of record as well there. But just your initial impression of him, because he did not have a huge number of runs in domestic circuit, just 1 century. And even in those A games, he struggled because particularly against Webster, and Webster is not an express pace bowler. He didn't look comfortable against short pitch deliveries, and yet the management backed him, persisted with him, and got their rewards.
I still don't think he looks particularly comfortable against the short pitch. I think it was Cummins who bowled that spell where he bowled short to him, and I thought, oh, okay, he's I thought he worked his way through it really well. But yeah, I didn't particularly think that was the case. That you needed him to be able to do that. I think the most important thing with him is we can't suddenly think that he's fully developed. We also shouldn't be a bit like what's happening with Washington, with one of the commenters. It's like, there's no reason for these guys to suddenly bat at number 3 and number 4. India have other options at number 3 and number 4. Those are specialist batters with a lot more runs behind them and a lot more experience behind them. You really want, the perfect situation is Pant at 5, Nitish at 6, and Washington at 7, if Jadeja's not playing, over the next 2 or 3 years. That's a really good 5, 6, 7. You've got players who can play shots there. You've got, guys who think about cricket differently. You've got good techniques. You've got left-handers. You've got lots of different options there. That's a really good setup for them to be. And Nitish should be in that position. If after 2 or 3 years, he's gone around the world, Megha, and he feels more comfortable, and the short ball, he works that out, and he works out, other options. He looks like, to me, he has a bit of a really good technique for when the ball isn't seaming around too much. I want to see him make more runs when it is seaming around. Although he's made some runs in this series specifically, but just 40s when it's been nipping around. I just want to see him all around the world, and they have a position available because he can bowl. Him being at number 6 makes sense, and because they have either Akshar or Jadeja or Washington at number 7, they can match him up with a strong number 7, and that's absolutely perfect. And then over time, we'll get to know whether he is just a number 6, right? Or if he's good enough to go up the order. Just on the Washington one, where are we here?
Plenty of comments.
So good to
Good
great.
to
So
great.
Sundar has played more than 25 overs himself, including facing the second new ball. Tell me one good reason why Washington can't be at number 3. Okay, here's the first one. You don't need him to bat at number 3. It doesn't help your side for him to be at number 3. That's the first reason, right? You have in him and Nitish, you have 2 young players that you can actually make more runs out of at number 6 and number 7. They can develop quicker at number 6 and number 7. And if they end up being great batters, right? And whether they ever do, who knows? You can move them up to number 3 and number 4 if you want to. Putting them there now does not help your side. India has top 4 players available to them in and outside of the current setup. There are plenty of other players who can do that job, who are specialists, right? If you had a team where you had these incredible number 6s and number 7s, that you didn't want to move. So England had this issue a few years ago, right? Where they had Root batted at 4, they had Stokes at 5, Bairstow, Butler, and all these different, Moeen Ali. And it was like, they have to fit a young player at the top of the order because there's no flexibility given to them because all these other players need to bat further down. Then that's why Ollie Pope ended up at number 3. Ollie Pope has not been a success at number 3. Almost no one outside of Kane Williamson is making any runs at number 3. So why would you pick someone who's played 4 games in his life at number 3 for Tamil Nadu, put him in a position where no one is making runs anywhere in the world, when he has a natural spot further down the order? Why would you ruin his development when there are specialist batters out there? Shubman Gill is a much better option at number 3, right? Devdutt Padikkal would be a much better option at number 3. The other thing is, when you talk about players like this and you go, well, he's batted more than 25 overs himself. Okay, that's fine. Including facing the second new ball. When you face the second new ball, you are generally facing it at a time when you are already set. You've been out there for a long period of time. The second new ball is nothing like going in when they're in the second over of a game because Pat Cummins has seamed the ball back and taken out your leg stump. The second new ball is nothing like facing Rabada after he's gloved off one of your batters in the first ball of the game. There is a reason no one in the world is making runs at number 3. You want Washington Sundar to get as much confidence and comfort and batting experience all around the world. If in the end you go, do you know what? One of these 2 guys can bat at number 3 or number 4. That's a huge advantage. Putting them there now, you are literally putting their batting careers in jeopardy for no reason. It's not a plus for India in any single way.
Moving on again, or rather moving back to Nitish Reddy, Wakar says, is he like Manus with an FC average record, but taking his game up a notch at the international level? But at least Manus had huge body of runs behind him in terms of experience as well in domestic cricket, while Reddy is still 21 and hasn't played as much first-class cricket.
No, it's very different. Manus had actually just broken through in first-class cricket, and that was the reason he got picked. Right. Well, sorry. Okay. The first time he got picked was because he could bowl a little bit of leg spin, but the second time when he came back, it was because he basically changed who he was as a batter in that year. What you're seeing with Reddy is what we see with a lot of young all-rounders is that they take a little bit longer to develop because it's very hard for an all-rounder to develop at the same pace as a specialist player. If you're a 19-year-old batter and that's all you ever do, you have spent 15 years basically batting and batting and batting and batting and getting better and better and getting specialist coaching so that your batting is at a high level. If you're an all-rounder, you spend at least half of that time doing your other skill. You can't prepare as much. So all-rounders kind of develop a little bit more spasmodically because of that. Ravi Jadeja, we all knew how good a bat Ravi Jadeja was when he was young. How many years did it take it to be a test player? And so with someone like Reddy, there is a natural skill there. He doesn't have, at the moment, all the other batting skills that he needs to require. I think they're all within him. But his bowling hasn't developed at all, right? He was picked to bowl in this series and has made runs. So even India didn't expect the batting that they've got out of him. they expected him to be more useful with bowling. I expect his bowling to develop over the next couple of years. You look at the great all-rounders, Imran Khan, Jadeja, Sobers, I'm missing another one, Daniel Vittori. Quite often, the cricketer they are at the end of their career is nothing like the cricketer at the beginning of their career, but they get picked early on quite often. I think Sobers had barely played first-class cricket when he played. I think Vittori was picked when he was still a teenager. Right, Imran Khan was picked like 5 years before he even understood how to use his gifts. Right, that's quite common with all-rounders. It's very different to the Manus situation, and very different kinds of players.
So how many years in first-class cricket before he got to make his debut? Was it in 2009? Was that his first game, or had he played before that as well?
Who? Manus?
Manus, yeah.
I don't know, but he'd been around for a while. He'd been in and out of the Queensland side, and then he plays for Australia, and then comes back. But yeah, he was the difference there was what you have with Manus is probably someone who found his batting peak around his mid-20s, right? So maybe 26, 27. And then they picked him the minute he found his peak. He was lucky because he only came into that. The reason he came into that squad is because he made runs in county cricket and he was in England. So he came in as injury cover, and then Smith got hit in the head. So realistically, what would have happened normally for Manus, a player like Manus, is they picked him when he was too young. He wasn't ready yet. He would have gone off and had 2 or 3 good years of first-class cricket, and then would have come back at 27, 28, or 29, or whatever, however old he would have been at that point, and he would have been picked in his peak. Right. What happens with Manus is the minute he hits his peak, he ends up in the side like 4 months later, which is that's just a random confluence of events, right? That just happen. That's the dream, Megha, because what you don't want to have is what happened to Mike Hussey, where Australia lost like 3 good years of Mike Hussey because they were like, but he's old. Like maybe he's just fluky. And then he just kept doing it year after year. And they're like, okay, no, clearly Mike Hussey is a better player. And then they found a role for him because Mike Hussey was an opener. So they had their opening spot covered, right? So they couldn't even fit Mike Hussey in the side. So that's a very different one. Nitish Reddy is not here. Nitish Reddy is in the side because he's an all-rounder with these incredible 2 skill sets, which is very rare. So, if you look at all-rounders in general, they are generally picked before they've done anything in first-class cricket that is good. Because if it works, it completely changes your team overall. And you want to get that kind of player in as soon as possible and get them developing. And because if you look at, this is, we're not saying Nitish Reddy is going to become Garfield Sobers, who's the greatest all-rounder of all time. But if you look at Garfield Sobers, I think they looked around and went, look, he's probably not the best left-arm finger spinner, but he's a pretty good left-arm finger spinner. We know he can bat, and we'll work on his batting later on. And he's a great fielder. Let's get him in the side, get him used to cricket, and then see how we go. And the first couple of years, he doesn't make many runs. He stops taking wickets almost altogether. He's almost in the side because he's a fielder who is quite handy. And then he makes 365 4 years in without any record. Again, I think Sobers' first 100 was 365, right? Because suddenly Sobers worked out what batting was and how to bring all these gifts together. The reason he hadn't been able to do that is he'd been a left-arm finger spinner, right? And he was a kid. And, so he starts as a teenager. So it's a very common thing. And what you don't want to do to those sorts of players is overtax them, right? You want to say to Nitish Reddy, look, we're going to fit you into the side. We want you to play around the world. We want you to probably bowl a little bit quicker. We want you to work out how to bowl more economically at times, whatever they want to do, but allow him to develop. He looks like he's a good enough batter that he can bat at number 6. Let's say he averages 38 at number 6, right? That's a more than fine average for a number 6 at the moment who can bowl 10 overs in a day, right? You would take that maybe in 5 years' time.
For any position, actually.
Higher up the order, 38 would be a great average at the moment. But then, if he does develop, maybe he is a number 4, right? He's got some skills of a number 4 if you look at him technically. And what if his bowling develops, right? And if his bowling develops as well, you now have someone who can bat perhaps in the top 5 who can give you 8 to 10 overs of good bowling in a game, right? You take risks with all-rounders that you don't take with other specialist players. The same way that Australia took a risk with Sam Constas, right? When you have a player who potentially has a really high ceiling, that's when teams will take risks. And you do it with all-rounders, and you do it with freakishly talented players between the age of 19, 20, 21. Jaiswal jumped the list of about 4 or 5 other more really talented players, right? There's heaps of other talented Indian batters out there that Jaiswal just leapt. Shreyas Iyer basically doesn't exist anymore, right? And a lot of players have been jumped over by Jaiswal because Jaiswal's ceiling is so high. Constas's ceiling is so high. Constas's floor is a lot lower than Jaiswal's. I think with Nitish is in a much better situation in that this is a great period of time to be a number 6 or a number 7, right? Because no one in the top of the order is making any runs. So if you average 38, as you just said, that looks like a great average now, right? Like everyone would take that. Whereas actually, if you bat in the top order, maybe 28 is like almost comparable to 38 at number 6. It's that hard to bat at the top in these games at the moment. I mean, have a look at the, India trying to face the new ball the other day. And it was just like, and Usman Khawaja trying to face Bumrah. How do you even hit those balls, right? Like the ball's moving so much at the moment. I think Nitish, I always go towards an all-rounder when I go for ceiling, because if Nitish works, even if Constas is a better player, right? If Nitish works, it means that India have for the next 12 to 14 years, the ability to have 7 batters and 5 bowlers in their side, if he works. Constas can be as great as he wants. He doesn't change the dynamics of the Australian team. He's just a batter, right? That's all he's ever going to be. I mean, in Constas' case, he'll probably try and bowl because he's just like the sort of guy who will try. But he doesn't change it in that same way. So all-rounders have the higher ceiling in almost all situations, but they also fail a lot more than any other cricketers, right?
Yeah.
Look at Mitch Marsh's current record, right? He's had a good couple of
Average
years.
of 10 in the series.
But not just his series. I mean, he's averaging about 30 in Test cricket, isn't he? And that's with a good couple of years. He's a decent bowler, but when it doesn't work, all-rounders look absolutely dreadful. But there's a reason Australia keep picking Mitchell Marsh. He can make 100 off 50 balls in a match and completely change it. And he could be their 5th bowler when he's fit, right? He's in the side because of the potential of what he can do, even though he's in his 30s, right? Corbin Bosch, South Africa, the exact same thing. They picked a guy as a 4th bowler who's not even a bowler in first-class cricket, right? He averages like 34 in first-class cricket. But Corbin Bosch can really bat and is improving as a bowler. I think he's working out how to be a bowler as he comes forward in his cricket. So they have a 30-year-old debutant, right, who they are treating like a project player. That's why all-rounders are so much more special than specialist players, because a great batter is really handy to find, but it doesn't get you an extra batter in your lineup or an extra bowler in your lineup. Washington and Nitish can. You have to be careful and smart with the way that you use them.
And considering how starved India have been of seam bowling all-rounders, they do back if they find one. In Hardik Pandya's case as well, didn't really have a huge body of work in domestic cricket, or first-class cricket in particular, yet got a look in and did fairly well in how much ever test that he played. Now, I've got your cue, and we have to move on to South Africa versus Pakistan and South Africa's journey to the WTC finals. They've booked their berth. 2-match series, multiple of those West Indies series onwards, it started looking realistic because they'd lost pretty comprehensively in New Zealand, almost forfeited that series and still sealed their berth. And their performances, just reflecting on each of those series. West Indies, there was one game that was drawn, and then in Bangladesh, the way they defeated Bangladesh at home, their first victory, series victory in Asia in a decade, multiple batters stepping up with centuries, bowlers getting injured, and 30-year-olds then getting a look in and doing well.
This is what I would say. I think they're a highly flawed side, right? And I think through most of this cycle, they haven't been able to bat. They might as well have had you and me batting for them at times. Like, they've been really bad. When they got to Bangladesh, they kind of unlocked a couple of... I thought Dazorzi and Stubbs were 2 guys that I wanted them to play in Test cricket. Those are really good Test players. And beforehand, they had like 32-year-olds who were never going to make any runs. Them picking talent over whoever made the most runs in domestic cricket the year before was a huge step forward for their batting. And the Bangladesh, I thought they would struggle. I didn't think they'd win both tests in the West Indies. And I didn't think they would win both tests in Bangladesh. And I was proved right in the West Indies. And by Bangladesh, they had changed things around and they started to make some runs. They don't need to make that many runs. You know, Anakas says South Africa's batting lineup doesn't look convincing. Mate, it wasn't even existing a year ago. They didn't have a batting lineup a year ago. Like, to not look convincing is a huge step up for South Africa, right? And why they can get away with that is they have a world-class bowling attack. It's a ridiculously talented bowling attack. I mean, they're picking guys now that I don't even think are in their top 8 best bowlers, and they still took about 12 wickets between Dane Patterson and Corbin Bosch in the last test, right? Corbin Bosch is like Liam Mulder is like a fringe player. Corbin Bosch is like his backup, and he came in and took 5 or 6 wickets in the match. Dane Patterson is like not in the top 8 best specialist bowlers in South Africa, and he's taken wickets in the last 2 games. How good is their bowling lineups when you could do that sort of stuff? The way they played, specifically Rabada in Bangladesh and their batting, that was the first time I went, oh, okay, there's something here. Having said that, they still didn't bat particularly well against against Sri Lanka. They should have lost this game against Pakistan. So in the last 3 test matches, I'd say there were plenty of chances for slightly better sides to have beaten them. But that is because when you are a bowling-led side, you're always going to be inconsistent because you need to be able to make runs. Bowlers win you matches. Batters make you consistent. And so that is what South Africa has been for the last few years. The difference now is that they don't have to bat Stubbs at number 3 anymore. Dazorzi is a much better top order player than some of the other players they've had. Temba Bavuma looks like he's back in form. They've got some good batters lower down in the order as well. It's still not a great batting lineup. It's still certainly not a convincing batting lineup. But when you've got Rabada and whoever else, and Rabada, Janssen, and whichever 2 or 3 other human bodies they put beside them out there, you're going to take a lot of wickets, and the other team's always going to be under pressure. I remember when that South Africa Sri Lanka game happened, and I think South Africa made about 170, 180, and Sri Lanka Sri Lanka were like really short odds. I put all my money on South Africa. I was like, I don't think Sri Lanka will get anywhere near that amount of runs, right? I didn't expect them to get bowled out for 38 or whatever it was. But do you know what I mean? I thought they'd get bowled out between 80 and 140 on that wicket without any doubt at all. But essentially, what I do most times is now I back South Africa when they're bowling, and I back the opposition when they're bowling, right? And you can make a lot of money supporting Test cricket at the moment if you want, betting on those 2 things. It's a fantastic bowling lineup. It's a batting lineup in development, and they've been lucky. They've played some very ordinary sides, and they're going to make the World Test Championship final. But good on them. They stole that last game. That takes guts.
And probably you would have then backed Mohammad Abbas as well. And there's a question around him.
Always.
Do you think Sports Fan asked if he deserved to be on the winning side? Now, that's obviously very hypothetical, but he was in Wilderness for so long, got a chance in the first innings, probably one understood why he was in Wilderness, but then in the second innings, 6 wickets to his name, he looked pretty convincing with that back of the length strategy that he stuck with.
He's a great bowler. And it's a crime against cricket that we haven't seen him in Test cricket for 3.5 years. And Pakistan needs to take a good look at themselves on how they can ruin a bowler like Mohammad Abbas. He is, even if you don't play him in every Test match, Megha, you just play him when you think the conditions are in his favour. And he's plug and play. He can bowl 20 over spells. Yeah. There are not many seam bowlers who can do that. I thought he bowled poor in the first innings, by the way. I thought he looked a little bit rusty. And by the second innings, he looked like one of the best bowlers in the world. I've seen him bowling county cricket. I know how good this guy is. It's ridiculous that Pakistan have ruined a talent like him. I've got to go, by the way, so I can't answer anymore. But I thought it was a fantastic. The bits I saw were really entertaining, and I missed the really, really entertaining bit. So I thought it was fantastic. I've really enjoyed this South African summer of what I've seen of it when I've not been sleeping.
Okay. You have the highlights to bank on then. Thank you so much, Jarrod, for the insightful conversation. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you again in the new year.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at Cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.